to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and with 4 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Moby Grape's Skip Spence, along with our special guest, Moby Grape and Skip Spence biographer Cobb. This is part 4 of my discussion with Cobb about the amazing life of Skip Spence, and it's episode 10 of our Grape Expectations series. Okay, now moving forward after the Truly Fine Citizen / Or era for Spence and the Grape, this is actually the time period where before I came across your Skip Spence book, I knew almost nothing about Skip. I mean, literally nothing, not a single fact, really no myths. I had nothing to go on. So by the time I got up to this point in your book, I was really excited because I certainly knew about Or and I knew about all these other things, but nothing moving forward. But before we actually step forward, there is one thing that we didn't talk about in the course of the last episode, which was our part 3 of the conversation, which is that there is apparently this drug that Skip may or may not have been on when all of this craziness happened, when he had his breakdown, called LBJ. Let's talk about LBJ for a second before we move forward.
And so Tim was the person who brought that up as LBJ as being a type of LSD. And David Rubinson, the producer, had mentioned in interviews that it was a type of, he didn't reference LBJ, but he talked about LSD and a type of blue cheer that Skip had in New York. And Tim DeLera, the band's road manager, who was in New York with them in that May-June timeline when they were trying to have a go at that third album. And so this is really their third time trying to record in New York because they did it in November of 67. They're back from the middle of January to middle of February 68. And then they're back, and we're talking late May, early June 1968.
Before Tim had even brought up the name of the drug, I had never heard it. I've never heard of it in any circumstance whatsoever, except Tim talking about Skip possibly being on the drug. And just to clarify what it is apparently a type of LSD that also has speed and heroin in it. So, I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, I unfortunately have tried all 3 of those, but to put all 3 of those together and try to think or feel like what that would do to me, it's kind of like trying to picture what roast beef covered in chocolate would taste like. I have no clue.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I can say is that we don't know when Skip started taking heroin. And we do know that he was taking heroin when he was living in San Jose in that, 69, 70, 71 timeline, like right at the time when he has finished recording or has come out. His sister visits him sometimes, and she had seen materials that, of course, indicate like this guy's taking heroin. We don't know when or how Skip got started on that. So we don't know if this is something that, was a part of his life that led to the breakdown that he had, or we don't know if this is a part of his
what allowed him to cope.
His self-medicating. It's not an either or. It could be both of these things too at the same time. It could have been something like when he's in Greenwich Village with Joanna and that guy who they're calling father. It could have come into play there at that time, and it could have come back afterwards. Because Skip's struggling, the mental health care system doesn't really have very much outpatient support at the time, and he's tempted. Of course, he's in this. People can be tempted all the time, but Skip's now in this world where he's being tempted. He's hanging out at the chateau, and he's exposed to temptations all the time. And so he's trying to take antipsychotic medication, but then he is self-medicating.
Well, this is also an interesting period because at this point, this is the first time of many that Moby Grape has broken up, or probably more accurate to say that they quietly and unceremoniously dissolved after Truly Fine Citizen. But, at this point, this is sort of round one of his first legion of starry-eyed acolytes who begin to kind of appear out of the woodwork, who profess undying love for him. And we're not talking about groupies. We're talking about people who cannot believe how great Moby Grape is and are doing their best to try to reanimate the prospect of Moby Grape. And one of those people, who at least was, interested in Skip continuing on in his, musical pursuit, was a resident of San Jose named Pat Simmons, who ends up bumping into Skip randomly in our laundromat one day, the most mundane possible place to bump into, the most unmundane person. And Skip invites him over to jam. And for a short while, this guy, Pat, would go visit his hero. And, he looked up to Skip like crazy. They would jam and, share a joint together. But the last time that Pat goes there, like we were just talking about, Skip is sitting on the couch, shooting up heroin, and with his wife and kids present, and such a massive talent just squandered, it was just too much for Pat to bear. And he kind of discontinued hanging out with him.
Yeah. So on one level, you see that happening to somebody, and they are struggling and self-destructive, and in today's terminology, self-medicating. But you see that, and that's horrible to see. But for Pat, this would be very different because this was a hero of his. This is somebody who's a few years older than him, or a couple years older, who was floating in the folk circuit, and everything was going right for him. And now he sees where everything has gone, or where it's all led to. And so it's probably doubly difficult for him to see that. And then, of course, there's the family dimension. This is a young man with a young wife, and he's got young kids in the house.
He's being like his version of Leave It to Beaver. I mean, he is now kind of a stay-at-home dad, but in order to cope with his responsibilities, unlike what was going on when he was working at the pickle factory and the furniture store, just to be able to function, he's shooting up heroin and hanging out with these little kids.
Yeah, it didn't seem like there was a plan after he made Ore, and he made Ore, which was a very personal statement. I think we did talk about this before, but Ore was very much a trailblazer in that way because, it preceded McCartney's first solo album, and it preceded John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, and it had a bit of both of those albums in it, like in that it had that homemade element to it, but also had the element that was a stark personal statement. And he might not have known, where to go after that.
One interesting story that you have in the book that really feels indicative of this particular era is told by Aaron, his son, Aaron. Would you do me a favor? Would you read that passage from the book?
Okay, sure. Even during this period of his childhood, Aaron Spence saw a different side of his dad. I remember we had little or no food, and he was watching over us, and I was hungry. He recalls. He goes to the refrigerator, and I remember he opened the door, and there was nothing but a pack of hot dog buns and some condiments. And he made a big presentation about how lucky we are to have food. Laughing to himself, Aaron continues, I didn't know any better, but I remember he made me feel like it was something special, what he was about to make me, because I was starving. He took the buns and spread mayo and mustard on them and gave it to me. He was singing as he prepared it, like a happy chef in a small kitchen. To this day, I still love mayo and mustard on toast for a quick snack. For a moment, he pauses, but I also remember going to the bathroom around that time and finding a burnt spoon on the toilet tank lid and bringing it to my mother. She would quietly take it away. It wasn't until later that I knew what it meant.
All right, that concludes your free sneak peek into today's Patreon episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either purchase this podcast by itself for $4, or better yet, subscribe at the major tier and get access to Discograffiti's 4 weekly episodes. That's Friday's free episode, the Sunday Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound episode, which showcases Patreon members and the Elephant Six world, your Monday bonus episode, and your Wednesday early release ad-free super extended director's cut of that Friday's show. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 6-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member so you don't miss a single thing at patreon.com/discograffiti.